What if I told you a woman was publicly humiliated, mocked, and kicked out of a luxury cafe just because of the color of her skin and the simplicity of her clothes? They assumed she was poor. They treated her like she didn't belong. They laughed in her face, called her names, and pushed her out the door. But here's what. No one in that cafe knew. Her husband owned not just that store, but the entire national chain. Stay with us, because what happened next didn't just destroy careers. It changed an entire industry. The bell over the cafe door chimed softly as Naomi Bell stepped into Rose Lake Cafe, the morning sun casting a halo around her silhouette, as if fate itself had followed her. In her linen shirt, a soft ivory faded by time, and love clung gently to her skin, and her jeans, though clean, had the creases of life lived without vanity. Her flats worn at the heel made no sound on the polished oak floors as she walked in with the quiet grace of someone who never needed to prove her place. Around her, the scent of freshly ground espresso beans mingled with bergamot candles and the faint perfume of money. Conversations paused. Eyes darted. A server in a crisp apron glanced up from polishing silver, her jaw tightening slightly at the sight of Naomi's simple attire. A man in a navy suit sipped his latte more loudly, as though to reassert his territory. Naomi's warm brown eyes scanned the room, not with confusion, but with familiarity. She had been here before, though not in this particular way. She approached the counter, her small canvas bag resting against her hip, like a trusted friend. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice like chamomile in the noise of the city. The barista, a young woman with flawless makeup and a stiff bun, barely glanced at her. "Pickups on the sidewalk," she said flatly, pointing to the glass window. Naomi smiled patiently. "I'd like to sit inside today if that's all right. 1 cappuccino, please." The barista blinked as though Naomi had asked to borrow her credit score. "We're kind of full right now," she replied, even though half the seats were empty. Naomi tilted her head slightly. "That's okay. I don't mind waiting." Behind her, a laugh erupted sharp and high-pitched from a table of influencers in pastel blazers. "She's probably looking for a plug," one of them whispered just loud enough to slice through the air. Naomi didn't turn. Her spine stayed straight, her hands still and calm. The barista sighed audibly and began tapping at the register with exaggerated care. "Name?" she asked Naomi. She replied. There was no recognition in the barista's eyes, only quiet calculation and a hint of contempt. A manager stepped out from the back, tall, lean hair slicked and skin pale as cream. His name tag read, Julian General Manager. He smiled at the barista, then looked Naomi up and down with a slow, deliberate scan. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, voice sweet, like poisoned honey. "Just placing an order," Naomi answered. Julian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. But next time we do ask that takeout guests use the side window. Our lounge space is reserved for our patrons." Naomi's eyes lifted to meet his. "I am a patron." There was a pause, a breath held too long. Then the room moved again, but differently. The energy shifted. A ripple passed through the cafe, like the early signs of a storm. Naomi said nothing more. She simply stepped to the side and waited for her coffee. Her presence, quiet as it was, had somehow become the loudest thing in the room. Naomi sat at the far corner of the cafe near a sun-dappled window, her cappuccino cradled between her palms like something sacred. The first sip was warm, but bitter, its foam collapsing faster than the patience of the staff. Across the room, the barista who had taken her order stood with crossed arms whispering to Julian and glancing over at Naomi like she was a spilled drink that hadn't been cleaned up. Laughter bubbled from the influencer table again, louder this time, unmistakably pointed. She brought her own bag. One of them giggled, the kind of laugh designed to pierce. I didn't even know they made tote bags like that anymore. Another woman with acrylic nails tapped her phone screen. Do you think she even knows what a single origin roast is? Naomi didn't react. She stared into the swirling center of her drink, her expression unreadable, but far from broken. A server named Kelsey approached slowly, not with a smile, but with the blank efficiency reserved for those who don't belong. "Excuse me?" Kelsey said, voice sharp as the click of her shoes. "This section is reserved for guests with reservations. You didn't book through our app, did you?" Naomi looked up gently. "No, I just walked in, like everyone else." Kelsey's lips pursed. "Then I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to move. We need the space for clients who planned ahead." Naomi blinked once, then nodded. Of course. She rose with grace, lifted her bag and looked for another spot. The cafe, though half empty, suddenly seemed to overflow with tension. A man in a blazer and silk scarf scoffed under his breath as she passed. She probably came in for free. "Wi-Fi," another woman murmured, trying to manifest wealth with that energy. Naomi stood near the bar, her coffee in hand without a word. Julian approached again, that plastic smile pasted across his face. "Ma'am," he said too loudly, "we just want to maintain the atmosphere here. Our clientele value ambiance." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Does that ambiance depend on clothing?" Julian blinked. "Of course not," he said, but his eyes betrayed him. "We just encourage a certain standard." Behind him, the pastel blazers giggled again. "She's probably here to apply for a job. One said I'd let her clean my table," another added. The barista clapped once sarcastically and said, "Seriously though, you've got to admire the confidence, coming in here like she owns the place." Naomi's lips parted, but before she could speak, another staff member, a young man in khakis and a name tag that read, Kyle, cut in loudly. "We have rules, ma'am. This is a curated space. If you're not going to order anything else, we'll have to ask you to finish your drink outside." Julian gave an approving nod. "We're not trying to be rude," he added, "just following policy." Naomi's eyes flicked from face to face. There was no kindness, only performance. The customers, the staff, even the manager, all playing their roles in a theater of cruelty, and she had been cast as the intruder. She held her coffee a little tighter. "Then I'll leave," she said, soft but clear. The room didn't thank her. It smirked, and as she stepped toward the door, the laughter behind her rose like steam. Hot, cruel, and impossible to ignore. Naomi stepped outside into the crisp spring air, the door shutting behind her with a finality that felt colder than the breeze. Her cappuccino was still warm in her hand, but the flavor had soured with humiliation. She stood by the curb, her posture still composed, though her heart beat a little faster now. Inside, the laughter hadn't stopped. Through the cafe's crystal-clear windows, she could see the group of influencers still animated, their eyes flicking toward her, like she was a punchline that wouldn't disappear. A notification buzzed on Naomi's phone. She glanced down. Her father's name lit the screen. She didn't answer. Instead, she inhaled deeply, as if the air alone could ground her. Back inside, Julian was recounting the encounter to a new customer, complete with exaggerated gestures. She actually asked if ambiance depended on clothing. He laughed. "I mean, come on. The influencers cackled in unison. She looked like she wandered in from a city bus. Someone added, "I almost Venmo'd her $5 out of pity." Another said Kyle chimed in from the espresso machine. I swear she was about to sit down at the founder's table, like she belonged. A customer at the bar leaned in. "You guys handled it well," she said, sipping her cold brew. "You can't just let people like that ruin the vibe." And just then the door swung open. The bell above it jingled soft but sudden. Heads turned. Conversations halted, mid-sentence. A tall man entered dressed in tailored gray slacks and a navy button-up that looked effortless, yet unmistakably expensive. His presence filled the room before his voice even spoke. The barista froze. Kyle's grin faded. Julian blinked once, then again. The man didn't hesitate. He moved with quiet confidence to the center of the cafe and looked directly at Naomi through the window. She didn't move. He turned to the staff, his voice calm but commanding. "Who asked my wife to leave this cafe?" No one answered. A beat passed, then another. The influencers exchanged glances. Julian stepped forward, swallowing. "Sir, we weren't aware she was affiliated with the owner." The man's eyes didn't waver. "Affiliated," he repeated. "She's not affiliated. She's married to him. And he is me." Silence dropped over the room like a curtain. The air grew heavy. The laughter died mid-breath. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it. The barista dropped a portafilter. Kyle took a step back. "Mr. Langston," someone whispered, almost reverent. "That's Elijah Langston, the founder. The face behind Langston Roasters. A billionaire not for show, but for vision. For building an empire of coffee houses that promised dignity, inclusion, and warmth. And now he stood in his own flagship cafe, looking not like a savior, but like a reckoning. His gaze swept the room. "So let me ask again," he said. "Who asked my wife to leave?" The room held its breath. Naomi finally stepped back through the door, her coffee still in hand. Her silence louder than any accusation. Elijah met her by the counter, took the cup from her hand, and gently set it down. "You never should have had to walk out," he said softly. Then he turned to face them all again. "But now you'll see who needs to be escorted out." The silence was thunderous, as Elijah Langston's words settled over the room, like a weight none of them could lift. Julian's confident posture collapsed into a nervous hunch as he stammered. Sir Iwiwi didn't realize she came in, and Elijah raised one hand, and even that small gesture froze Julian mid-sentence. "You didn't realize because you didn't care," to Elijah said. His voice wasn't raised, but it cut sharper than glass. "You looked at her clothes, her skin, her silence, and you decided she didn't belong." Naomi stood beside him, not with triumph, but with grace that made their cruelty look even smaller. Kyle dropped his apron, his mouth hanging open, his eyes darting to the influencers who were already trying to shrink in their velvet seats. One of them tried to laugh a brittle sound. "It was a misunderstanding," she offered. "We thought maybe she was lost." Elijah's eyes locked onto her like a hawk's. "You thought she was beneath you," he corrected. "You didn't just judge her. You performed it for each other, for your followers, like her pain was part of your morning content." A barista in the back murmured, "Was just following what Julian said." Elijah turned his attention to Julian. "How long have you worked here?" Julian swallowed hard. 2 years, sir." Elijah nodded slowly. "And in those 2 years, how many times have you enforced your own dress code?" Julian hesitated. "I mean, rarely. This felt like a premium moment." We had influencers in a social campaign launching today. I thought, you thought Elijah interrupted that image mattered more than values. You thought a woman who didn't fit your curated aesthetic couldn't possibly matter. You forgot who built this company. He gestured around the room. I built Langston Roasters on a promise. Not coffee, not style. A promise that no matter where you came from, you were worth respect. Dignity. A seat at the table. He looked around, and today my wife was denied that. In my name, the door opened again. Heads turned. This time it wasn't a customer. It was Gloria Reynolds, the company's chief operations officer, a woman known for her fierce loyalty and zero tolerance for hypocrisy. She strode in with a clipboard and 3 HR directors at her heels. We got the footage, she said without hesitation. Security called us the second Naomi was removed. Mr. Langston, you want us to proceed? Elijah gave a small nod. Every person who participated, who laughed, who filmed, I want their behavior reviewed, documented, and addressed. The influencers stood. Wait, are you firing us? One gasped. Gloria didn't even blink. You don't work here, she said. But you are permanently banned from every Langston location worldwide. Another influencer shrieked. We have followers. You'll regret this. Elijah's smile didn't reach his eyes. No. You'll regret this when your brand becomes known for what you did today. Gloria turned to the staff. As for employees, there will be disciplinary hearings, effective immediately. Suspensions, terminations, reassignments. This is not a warning. This is a shift. Kyle looked sick. Julian looked like he might faint. Naomi stood still, her presence glowing with quiet power. Elijah wrapped his arm around her, then said one last thing. She didn't ask for special treatment. She never does. All she ever asks for is respect. And from now on, anyone who works under my name will know respect isn't optional. The fallout was swift and brutal. By noon, 3 influencers had lost their brand sponsorships, each severed with cold statements about misaligned values and zero tolerance for discrimination. Their followers turned on them, hashtags multiplying by the second, their comment sections flooded with images of Naomi graceful calm, powerful captioned, the real standard. Langston Roasters released an official statement just hours after the incident, a video of Elijah and Naomi seated side by side. Not rehearsed, not scripted, just real. Elijah said, "Today we failed, but failure is only final if it's left unchallenged." Naomi added, "I wasn't embarrassed by what happened. I was disappointed. Because this isn't just about me. It's about the quiet woman who works a double shift and gets looked at like she doesn't belong. It's about every person who's ever been judged before they've been heard." The video went viral, 20 million views in 2 days. A movement sparked from a single coffee cup and 1,000 microaggressions boiling over. Inside the company, HR launched internal restructuring. Julian was terminated with cause. Kyle was suspended without pay and ordered to complete bias training if he hoped to return. The regional manager who had approved the influencer campaign was reassigned to a back-office analytics team, far from any customer interaction. But the most staggering shift came from inside the walls of the Langston headquarters. Gloria and Naomi co-authored a new mandate, the Respect Initiative. It wasn't just a slogan, it was policy. Every employee from cashier to VP was required to complete immersive training in cultural humility class, awareness, and anti-bias leadership. Store walls now carried a new plaque etched in brushed steel. Come as you are, leave with dignity. Sales initially dipped under the weight of scandal, but within weeks they surged, not because of pity, but because people felt seen. A woman named Lillian from Atlanta posted a tearful video sharing how, inspired by Naomi, she stood her ground when profiled at a boutique and walked out with her head held high. A black teen in Chicago wrote to corporate thanking Naomi for showing him that quietness isn't weakness. "My voice is soft," he wrote, "but now I know it's still worth hearing." Letters poured in. Stories bloomed like wildflowers through concrete. One by one, people who had never stepped into a Langston Café before now chose it, not just for the coffee, but for the principle. Meanwhile, Naomi kept showing up, no press, no entourage, just herself, walking into cafes in jeans and a head wrap, talking with baristas, sitting with students, being everything they didn't expect and everything they now respected. Elijah watched the change unfold with awe. She didn't raise her voice. He told his board of directors. She just raised the standard. 6 months later, the Langston Café chain had become more than a brand. It was a blueprint. News outlets dubbed it the coffeehouse revolution. Industry giants sent delegates to learn from their new policies. Universities invited Naomi to speak not just as the wife of a billionaire, but as a thought leader in ethical transformation. Yet Naomi never changed. She still walked into stores quietly with the same soft glow in her eyes and that unmistakable air of calm resilience. At the flagship location in San Francisco, a new mural was unveiled on the wall. It wasn't flashy or corporate. It was a painting of Naomi, standing in front of the counter, that day head high tote, on shoulder, eyes forward. Beneath it were the words she had spoken just before being told to leave. "I only wanted coffee, but I'll settle for change." Tourists came to see it. Baristas wept in front of it. And above all, it became a symbol of what dignity looks like when it refuses to flinch. Elijah stepped down as CEO and appointed Gloria the manager, who had dared to listen, as the new chief culture officer. Under her leadership, the Respect Initiative spread to other industries. A salon chain adopted it, then a clothing retailer, then an entire hotel group. Naomi's story had created a ripple that turned into a wave. But the most touching tribute came from a girl named Aliyah. She was 11 with big curls and a bigger heart. She'd written Naomi a letter on notebook paper, saying she wanted to open a bookstore cafe one day. She called it Naomi's Place. Her tagline: "Where kindness is the dress code." Naomi read it aloud at a community event and cried for the first time since that day in the cafe. Not from pain, but from knowing the storm she endured had watered something powerful, something permanent. At home, Elijah brewed her tea each night, still watching her, the way a man watches a lighthouse. Grateful, grounded one evening as they sat on the porch and watched the sky shift from gold to indigo. He whispered, "You changed everything." Naomi looked at him and smiled. "No," she said, "we just reminded them who we've always been." And as the stars flickered to life, it was clear. This wasn't just a story about coffee or cruelty or class. It was a story about grace. A story about what happens when quiet strength meets public disrespect and turns it into purpose. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She raised a mirror, and the world finally saw its reflection. They laughed at her silence. They mistook grace for weakness. But what they didn't realize was that dignity always speaks louder than cruelty. When her husband arrived, not with fury, but with truth, he didn't just defend his wife. He dismantled an empire built on bias, and he rebuilt it with one powerful message: "In this place, we serve respect before coffee." Since that day, the cafe chain restructured everything. New leadership, new culture, new rules. And across the country, people who looked like Hermodest, black, overlooked, were treated differently because one woman dared to stand tall in flats and a linen blouse. So the next time someone walks in, quietly, gently, without a designer bag or diamond ring, ask yourself, what story are you writing about them in your head? Because in this story, the nobody turned out to be the queen.